Well, we start today's episode with massive breaking news out of the UK. I've been saying for a little while that we might have reached peak woke, peak madness, that perhaps some common sense is creeping back in, and this is another example that maybe, just maybe, we have some cause for optimism. It is a UK story, so of course we're joined by our UK correspondent Anna McGovern. Thank you so much for joining us once again on the Aussie Wire.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Anna, tell us about this story. It's been massive news. It's all over social media, but there's some detail here.
Yes, no, definitely. And I think we're starting to see a step in the right direction, but I don't actually think it goes far enough. So now it has been ruled that children will no longer be prescribed puberty blockers by the NHS. However, clinical trials will still be taking place for children with these puberty blockers. So I think it's a step in the right direction. We are now, we're now seeing that more children are not going to be exposed to really dangerous medicine. This is something that cannot be reversed and is something that will have lifelong effects on these children who are making decisions that they're quite frankly too young to actually understand the consequences for. So I think that this is an incredible move. However, this is also available for like private clinics as well. Children are still able to access that. So step in the right direction, but this needs to be banned all over, I think.
Well, the devil is always in the detail. We cover a lot of stories like this on the Aussie Wire where there's the headline and then there's the substance. And this is yet another example. I tend to agree with your characterization. It is interesting, though, that these are children that we would never allow to get, for example, a tattoo because that's too permanent. That's too big of a decision. How have we got to the point where we're allowing children to do this? Or is it really the children making these decisions? Or are they perhaps being influenced?
They're absolutely being influenced, I believe. I think we're seeing a lot of gender ideology now being pushed on places such as social media, in schools, by trans activists themselves. I've seen so much commentary on social media as well with young children, trans activists, who are actually documenting their gender transition online. And I think, especially now we've got children using social media before they're actually old enough to be allowed to actually use that platform, they are being continuously exposed to this narrative, to this agenda that is being shoved down their throats. And I think for many children, especially like in the past, we had the tomboy phase for girls, for example, who are growing up. Now that could even be justification enough to say, well, I must have been born in the wrong body, even if that child is, say, even 6, 7, 8 years old. I've worked in schools before, and I've personally seen young children actually going through, gender transitions, and in cases as well where the parents had no idea about it, and we were told as members of staff we were not allowed to tell the parents that their child was actually going into school identifying as the different gender to what they actually are with a different name, and the parents did not know. So I think for a lot of children it's now so much more easily accessible, it's a lot more accepted online, and what I actually think is that they are being kind of indoctrinated into making a life-changing decision that they're too young to understand. And I think that this is why we need to clamp down hard on this, or else we're going to see so many more children go through this.
Well, it's interesting. You're not the only one saying that. In fact, a number of people that did transition and have since detransitioned are saying the exact same thing. They're saying, we were too young to make these decisions ourselves. This was really actually my parents' or other people's decision on my behalf, and they just convinced me that it was my idea. I want to go to an article from 2022 from the Daily Mail. Young people who detransition describe death threats, doxing, intimidation, and being accused of genocide from the, quote, cult-like transgender community that they turn their backs on. Now, the article goes into a bit more detail here. Trans campaigners face discrimination and many see themselves in a life or death civil rights struggle. So that's one side. That's the people campaigning on the trans side. Detransitioners say that they face harassment for leaving the community. Many describe online vitriol, doxing, intimidation and death threats. They are in fact there have been web users threatening to pipe bomb a hearing in Florida on trans care for kids. And trans campaigners shouted bigot and shame on all of you at detransitioners. Now, if you or I were to say any of those things or threaten any of those things, at transgender people or events where transgender people were known to be, you and I would be charged with hate crimes. And certainly in the UK, you'd be going to prison for a very, very long time. Is there any suggestion yet of detransition is actually beginning to use things like the Sex Discrimination Act and these anti-discrimination laws against the transgender community itself?
You know, I actually think we're going to see an increase of this. And it reminds me of a story I read quite recently about a young woman called Charlie Bentley Astor, who between, I believe, the years of 2013 and 2020 identified as a man, as she's a biological woman, and also used different pronouns like they, them, and alternated between different pronouns throughout the years. But when she accessed, like a GP, I believe, clinic to, discuss actually going through a transition, they actually turned her away. They did not give her a referral. And she believes that actually kind of saved her life.
Wow.
And I think that we're going to actually see a lot more of these people coming forward and actually saying, they were sold a lie by these trans activists, and possibly especially from quite a young age, kind of indoctrinated into following this. I think you've got kind of a cult mentality with a lot of young people as well, who kind of push this forward as well. And for people like me as well, all I have said is not children and protect women's spaces. And I've received so much abuse online. I've been shadow banned before for speaking up on these issues. And I've received the most horrendous messages just because I said to keep women's spaces women only and to not allow children to transition, which I don't think should be a controversial stand to make.
Well, there is, of course, in the middle of all of this, very real human beings having very real human experiences. We see, especially in the case of the children, you really can't lay the blame at their feet. And then these people are finding themselves in a situation where they kind of have no friends at all. A lot of these people lose a lot of their friendship groups and a lot of their family support when they choose to transition. And then if they do then turn around and choose to detransition, a lot of these people find themselves completely alone. I think it's a responsibility on all of us, Anna, that we actually support people, especially if they are choosing to go through that detransition process, and help them to find their feet again.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that this is something we should be encouraging more young people to actually follow, because I think, again, we're seeing so much of this ideology pushed in every single institution now. And I think that if we have people who are brave enough to actually speak up against this, and I say brave enough because it could actually, when I went to Kelly J. Keane, who is a women's rights activist, she hosts in London once a month, Let Women Speak event, which invites women to, gather together, share their experiences of how gender ideology has impacted their life. And I've personally met these women who actually had to wear masks and hide their identity at these events because they were so concerned that if they were identified being at this peaceful gathering, that they would lose their job and, their entire livelihood just for wanting to protect women's spaces. So I think that there are actually a lot more people against this than we're probably seeing online, but they're just not actually in a position where they're able to speak out.
And final question for you, Anna. We're coming back to the politics of this. This, to me, even though it's in practice, it doesn't outlaw the puberty blockers being prescribed in private practice, and it does still have the loophole for clinical trials. It does, to me, seem to represent quite a big ideological shift, and it was certainly not one that I saw coming more than a week or so ago when the first rumours and first murmurs of this began to come out. Do you think this does represent a change in direction for the UK government, or is this just an anomaly?
I would love to hope that it's a change of direction, but I don't think that the current government that we have in the UK is fit to govern. And I think that actually when we approach the general election, that they won't be in number 10 for much longer after that. I think we will see Labour win. So what I would like to think is that we are now stepping in the right direction, but we're not quite all the way there yet.
Well, we're going to have to wait and see. The UK is in many respects the home of freedom as we have known it, such as it is. And, we live in an amazing time, and we've lived in amazing countries that are freer than pretty much any other countries in almost any other moment in history. But that is under threat, and we need to see that restored. We certainly will watch what happens in the UK with keen interest. Anna McGovern, thank you so much.
Thank you.